It's a right. So we're back again for an exciting week. Just show of hands, how many were here last week? Okay. So most of you have heard the introduction, so I'm not going to give a formal introduction, just to say that we're very pleased again to have Avrum with us tonight. And again, we will be sorry, my phone. Sorry, I'm just going to decline that. Sorry about that. So the topic tonight of the four-part series is Proud to be a Jew. And tonight we'll be exploring heroes throughout our history from Moses to Eli Cohen. So that gives us quite an expanse of history that Avram will be giving us. I will be monitoring the Q&A in the chat, so feel free to use that if you're comfortable using the raise your hand, or just shout out. Avram has always been wonderful in wanting very interactive sessions with us, so this is an opportunity to question, ponder, and I'm not going to say anything more because we always go over time, and I really love hearing Avram speak. So let Avram do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me again tonight. I'm really excited about the series. I've been asking or telling other people about it. Is this closed for Beth David, or can other people come as well?
Anybody can join.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. Just you should know that prior to this, I was doing a podcast. I have a new podcast, which is called the Avrum Rosensweig Show, formerly known as Hat Radio. And I basically I do long format interviews. I'm really deeply fascinated by humankind and our stories, our narrative. And I like nothing more than hearing a story from someone obviously who can articulate it about their own lives, about where they've come from and what they've done, what their relationship was with their parents. I just interviewed a young man whom you might know. His name is Josh Arbus. And Josh Arbus's parents are Dr. Gordy Arbus and Sharon Neese. And Josh is has an inimitable spirit. Since he was 9 years old, he's had a very serious stutter. Not that he's a stutterer. He has a stutter, and there's a distinction there. And I have known him since then, and I've watched him. I was at his bar mitzvah, and then various different events afterwards. And he's a kid with a smile on his face. He's a kid who today has a wonderful job in consulting. He's an engineer working on major municipal projects. And he's a lovely girlfriend and beautiful family. And he has a really serious stutter. And if you know anybody who has stutters, you'll know that sometimes they will be blocked. It's called blocked, being blocked from saying a word, sometimes for a second, sometimes for 5 seconds, sometimes for 10, sometimes for half a minute. And I remember when I was at his bar mitzvah, and he'd be saying his speech, his Devar Torah, and he couldn't get a word out, and he literally physically jumped up and down. Does anyone here know anybody with a stutter like that, or a stutter at all? Any experience that way? It's really something to watch and to hear. The thing about Josh is that he has overcome it. Not as though he doesn't stutter anymore. I don't think he stutters as much as he used to, but he has really built a life for himself that anybody would be proud of. And today, he looks at his life as not as a curse, the stutter is, but as a blessing. And I asked him what his takeoff is of Moshe Rabbeinu, who we all know there's a midrash that spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu putting a very hot coal into his mouth and subsequently not being able to articulate his words so well. Here's a very interesting thing I share with you, and this is very much in sync, by the way, with our discussion tonight because we're talking about heroes. To me, Josh Harvest is a hero. He said to me that he was a little bit taken back by the fact that God said to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Don't worry about not being able to express your point because your brother Aaron is going to be there with you." And we all sit there. I'll put words in your mouth. I hope you don't mind. We all sit there and we say, "Yeah, that's good, God. That's he's got a brother he can go with. Nothing nicer than hanging out with your brother, especially when you're challenging Pharaoh. And Aaron will talk to you when you get blocked." And Josh's response was he didn't really like that. He thought, you know what, I'm an independent fellow, and if I get blocked, well, I'll get through it, and it'll be my responsibility to do so. He says to the extent that sometimes when he is speaking and somebody finishes his sentence, which is what we do that with people who stutter, right? I do it. He says he gets a bit annoyed by them. So I share this with you because, again, this is where I just came from, and I was extraordinarily rude that when I first came to the group here tonight that I was eating. But you'll know that if I didn't eat, I would probably like perish away from here. You wouldn't have me at all. So I needed to eat my pierogies. And I'd be more than happy to share my pierogies with anybody. But Josh Arbus is a hero. I would argue he's a Jewish hero. He's a very strong Jewish consciousness, and he's a beautiful person. Any thoughts or questions on what I just said? The recording last week was, yeah, Barbara.
I think that what you have pointed out is essential and is so important and not something that we often think about. It is really important not to let somebody speak for us.
Yes, it is. It is extraordinarily important. But I would say, Barbara, too, and tell me if you agree with me, there was something I still feel was very obviously supportive and nice in what God said to Moshe Rabbeinu. You'll go with your brother. Like, was that wrong, do you think? Do you think that was
No,
wrong?
no, it was not wrong, but I think it was not taken in the full context as it was meant, because I think it's important that we go with our siblings, our brothers, our family, whatever, like that. But to allow him to speak for him all the time, I'm not sure that that's the best message.
Yeah, I did say to Josh that in learning the Torah, like the complete cycle, and I could be wrong. Someone pointed out to me if I am, please. I don't remember Aaron representing Moshe because of his speech challenge. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just don't remember it.
No, I don't remember either.
So yeah, so while God
Interesting.
offered that, yeah, like God offered that
Yeah.
as a sort of savior for him, the truth of the matter is I don't know how much it occurred. And then when we go to the latter parshiot of the Torah, where God is Moshe is speaking directly to the Bnei Israel, one doesn't get a sense, and this is a midrash, so let's call it what it is, but one doesn't get a sense that Moshe in any way whatsoever is being slowed down because of his inability to articulate well. It's quite the opposite.
Right.
And we do know
Um,
about we know about stutters that generally when people get older, they organically move away from stuttering. My father had a stutter, and it didn't last. Eventually, he stopped stuttering. Once in a while, you would hear him stutter. Well, actually, once in a while, I'll stutter as well. And there's an argument that stuttering is genetic. Does anyone here have a stutter or know anyone who has a stutter? Last week's recording was really good, by the way. I listened to a bunch of it, and I was really happy that there were no Naomi was on it. I think Brian was on it. There were a number of people who were on it, and they really augmented what we were doing. It was a real sheer. It was a real sheer, like a real collective sheer. So Yisha Koach, and I tell you this because I would like nothing more than to hear from you about heroes and heroism throughout Jewish history.
I think
Um,
Anna wants to say
Yeah,
something.
yeah, Anna, please, Anna Bloom.
I want to say something. I, I, you were talking about Josh and how he doesn't like it when people
Yeah.
finish his sentences. And I think that's very important for us all to slow down have a little bit more patience with people and let them finish what they were going to say. But I find today people are constantly interrupting me when I'm talking. They want to get
Well, let
their
me just say, no, I'm kidding there,
yes, exactly. Yeah, but no, it's not the to clarify what I'm saying. It's because they want to say what they want to say, and they don't want to take the time to listen to me.
Anna. Right.
I have to say, but also just people in general are in too much of a rush these days. You look at the drivers, they have no patience. What happened to our patience?
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point that very often when people hear someone else speaking, it's not as though they're responding to what that person said. Immediately they take the conversation back to themselves, and that is problematic. So your points are really well taken. Is that your stage name, Anna Bloom?
My stage name?
It's a great name, Anna Bloom. I wish I had that name. So
No,
simple.
it's
It's
my,
like ladies and gentlemen, Anna Bloom.
it's my
Um, Anyways, I think that it behooves us to do a little explaining, before we head forward into some of the great heroes in Jewish history. And prior to doing that, I would like you to think, please, A, what is heroism? And B, in your mind, who jumps out as a hero throughout our history? Both men, women, and children. And I say children because I think it behooves us to remember those little kids who climbed over the walls of the ghettos, the Warsaw Ghetto and otherwise, late at night to be able to retrieve some food for their family back in the ghettos. Those little guys, those little girls, they were all heroes. They were all heroes. So let's talk about what is heroism, okay? So I found this piece at Jerusalem. It's called prayerteam.org, and every single day they have a Hebrew word of the day. Okay, the Hebrew word of this day was gibor. Everyone familiar with that word, gibor? What is a gibor? Okay, so listen. Today's word gibor, hero, is very important. It's a very important word in the Bible, in the Torah. But unfortunately, every single English translation missed it altogether. Now, when you study Torah, that there are many, many different translations to the Torah. And very often, when you're speaking to someone who teaches Torah, you'll ask them, what does this and this word mean? And they will quote various different explanations. And the interesting thing, by the way, is that the divergence of explanations will change the meaning within the Torah. And I'll give you an example, okay, that when the Jewish people set upon Aaron to build a golden calf, one translation of what he did was that he rolled the gold together, of which he secured, and he threw it into a fire. And there's another one which said he hammered it out, some such explanation. And that does change his responsibility somewhat when you read the text and you dive into it a little bit. So reading the Torah and looking at the words and defining them, and sometimes defining them differently, does have an impact on the ultimate outcome of the message. So listen to this. Every single occurrence of the 40 times that the word Gibor is mentioned in the Old Testament, and every single case of the five in the New Testament, it's substituted with the word mighty. Seder? So one would think that Gibor is heroic, is a hero in nature. But in fact, these definitions, these translations, actually say the word Gibor. How do they translate it? They translate it as mighty. But mighty relates only to the strength and the size and misses the full meaning of Gibor, the hero. Most dictionary definitions of mighty, such as Merriam-Webster and many others, say possessing great and impressive power or strength, especially on account of size, i.e., whoa, he was a big man, she was a strong woman. and therefore was able to save this person. Mighty then is lacking the most important characteristic of Gibor, or of hero, which is what? What would you say if I brought in a hero here, okay? Somebody who just ran into a burning home, and I say, here's my buddy Helen, and she's a hero, and she just saved a number of people in a burning home. What would you characterize her heroism as? Give me some adjectives. Give me some adjectives. What's a hero? Throw it out.
Selfless,
Brave.
What's it? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
selfless,
I said brave.
Okay,
I
Paula,
said-
very good. Noreen, very good. Anybody else?
Gutsy.
Gutsy, yes. Yes.
Empathy.
Empathetic. You got to be empathetic to be a hero, no question. Yeah. Okay, so by saying this person is mighty and therefore did a heroic act, it kind of detracts from some of the most important descriptions that we can actually label this individual, which is courage, self-sacrifice, both of those were said, being a warrior, and a moral excellence. Okay? I think what this means is that anyone familiar with the Yiddish term oisvorf? My parents used to use. Did your parents not use Yiddish pejoratives? Oh, he's an oisvorf, you know?
Thrown out.
Anyway, huh?
Thrown out.
Yeah, well, it means not a nice guy. He's an oisvorf, you know? So oisvorfs, when they rescue someone, we don't really qualify them as being a hero. We seem to think it's narcissistic in nature. But being mighty is the least important attribute of the hero. Take, for example, David and Goliath. There's a good mashal. David was mighty. Goliath was, yet nobody ever doubted that Goliath was and David was not. Nobody ever doubted that David was the hero. So what's the problem of the English Bible translator who so feverishly avoided the word hero for the cost of distorting the full meaning of so many Bible verses? To be fair towards these otherwise usually faithful translators, the first thing to check is the availability of the word hero at the time they translated the Bible. Here's a really interesting piece, and it speaks to how we learn and how many different factors and dimensions are involved in our learning of Torah. Listen to this. A little etymological research brings up the fact that the word hero was coined in English in 1387. Whereas the King James Version of the Bible was completed in 1611. Hence, the translators have had sufficient amount of 224 years to learn, to practice, and internalize the word hero, and yet they avoided it completely. Was there something else that made the word hero not palatable to them? Was it, again, an issue of political correctness due to the Greek origin of the word? Whatever it was, the cost of the inability of English readers of the Bible to learn the full spectrum of one of the most important words in the Bibles is sad to say, but exchanging hero as it is in Hebrew into just mighty, here's a very cool piece, reduces the full magnitude of God. Why? Because we read in Psalms, who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle, right? So the inference is that the Lord is strong, as of kiviochel, like they say, not really, but kiviochel, as if it were, that God is strong, he has muscles. God isn't just mighty, he represents moral supremacy over his enemies. The Hebrew text here says that God is a hero. Anyone can be mighty, but only a few also demonstrate courage, self-sacrifice, being a warrior, and moral excellence. Only they are heroes. In Isaiah it says, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government is upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor of the Mighty God, of the Everlasting Father, of the Prince of Peace, and so on. So this is a very, very interesting way of discussing our issue tonight about what is heroism. I think that all the people whom we are about to discuss, and again, I'd be very interested in hearing from you as to who in your mind is a hero throughout Jewish history, would all have those components to them, would be courageous, would be self-serving, almost altruistic, although I don't want to get into it, but altruism has, I'm not a big fan of the word because it means that a person doesn't do this for themselves, and personally, I think psychologically everything leads back to us, not in a narcissistic way, but that being said, is brave and yes, and can be mighty as well. So let's take a look at some of the heroes in history, in Jewish history, and we won't necessarily do it in order of chronological order. So I'd like to start with a man whom many of us know, and interestingly, many of us do not know. I remember when Eli Rubenstein, the spiritual leader of Congregation Habonim, introduced me to this fellow, his memory, and Eli always has a way of doing this. He always goes, "Well, of course you know who this and this is, right?" And I'm sure we all know people like that. Of course you know who this is, and I go, "I don't. I'm sorry." And once he had told me who it was, I was actually amazed that I hadn't known, you know. And the person whom I'm speaking of is Janusz Korczak. Janusz Korczak. I see Barbara looking up in the sky. Does that mean you don't know who Janusz Korczak is?
I have heard the name, and I
Yeah.
can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough.
Oh, wow.
So many people have not. Has anyone ever heard of Janusz Korczak? Celia, you've heard of Janusz Korczak?
Warsaw Ghetto.
Yes, right. Warsaw Ghetto. Yeah,
He was the doctor, and he wouldn't leave the children.
correct. So let very good. So let me give you a little bit of a context here. Janusz Korczak, he was born Henry Goldschmidt, and he was born in 1878 to Jewish parents. And ultimately, he was in Poland, and he lived in Warsaw, and he studied medicine. And he did very, very well in medicine. But the thing was that he had a propensity, he had a gift, he had an understanding of childcare, of how to relate to children. So he decided that he would go down a different path. And the path that he decided he would go down would be one of taking care of children. So what Janusz Korczak did was he started up an orphanage in Warsaw. Okay. Now, the fascinating thing about Janusz Korczak, born Henry Goldschmidt, was that the orphanage that he started had a philosophy to it, had a way about it, as any institution does. Beth David Synagogue has a constitution. It has a particular way in which it conducts its services, a particular way in the way it looks at its leadership, what's required of the membership. It's a constitutional piece, and that is reflective in the core, the heart, the soul of the institution itself. Janusz Korczak was a very big believer in children's rights. In fact, today he is considered to be the father of children's rights. So when you take a look at courses given around the world in universities, including right here at home, York University, and people are studying about children and children's rights, Janusz Korczak plays a very, very important role in that discussion. Now, how did Janusz Korczak how did his belief in the rights of children play out within his orphanage? So listen to this. In 1907-08, Korczak went to study in Berlin. While working for the Orphan Society in 1909, he met Stefania Woloslenska, his future close associate. He had a right-hand person. In 1911-12, he became the director of Dom Sirot in Warsaw, an orphanage of his own design for Jewish children. Now listen to this. He hired Woloslenska as his assistant, and there he formed a kind of a republic for children with its own small parliament, court, and a newspaper. We're talking about kids who were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They probably graduated from the orphanage probably around 15 or 16. So there are some Korchak orphans, I believe, that are potentially alive today. He reduced his other duties as a doctor, some of his description of the summer camp for Jewish children in this period, and subsequently were later published in the Fragmenti Utwaro. They have been translated to English. This is a newspaper that he edited and helped to write. So when you read Korchak, what you discover is these wonderful stories of which occurred within his orphanage, having to do with the day-to-day operations of the orphanage through the kids. So there was a mayor within the orphan, and the mayor could have been 9 years old. And there were public hearings within the orphanage. As an example of chas v'shalom, one of the kids stole a pair of socks. Okay, there were sort of judicial operations that went on in order to have that child come before this court, of which Korchak had set up, and the children were responsible for it. And they would go through some due process in order to determine, did the kid steal those socks, and what should be the outcome? What should be the potential punishment for that? I remember learning about Korchak, and I remember learning about his approach to it. And I thought how marvelous, how heroic it is. Because if you think that it's anathema to what exists today in our society, imagine how anathema it was to Poland in the 30s, right up until the end of the 30s, and prior to that too, actually. What Eastern European culture would have thought about giving children's rights, to the extent that there were mayors in this little orphanage, that there were judges, right, and that there were lawyers. It was an approach which was so far before its time that even people today are just floored by it. Any questions or thoughts about Korchak?
Was he the one who led the orphans to the concentration camp?
Yeah. So Bernie makes a good point. Firstly, hi Bernie. Nice to see you. So here's the thing about his heroism. The Nazis, Yamach Shemo, the Nazis came to Korchak and they said to him, "You can go. You can leave. We're taking your kids, but you can go." I asked my sister Javi about that. So what do you think about that, Javi? Did the Nazis have a strange respect for certain people? My sister Javi said, remember, she's gone through a lot in her life. Her husband was murdered. You know, she said, no, I think that was part of their cruelty. By going to a Korchak and saying to him, you can go, but we're going to keep your kids. What are they saying to him in essence, right? You can live and we're going to murder your children. How is a man like Korchak going to respond to that? And I thought, my God, that's a very, very compelling response. So the Nazis, they come to Korchak not once, not twice, many times. They said, you can go. And he says, no. They offered him sanctuary on the Aryan side. And here's what happened. He said, instead, we're going to march together to the trains. And here's what happened. The children were dressed in their best clothes and each carried a blue knapsack and a favorite book or two. Joshua Purley, an eyewitness whose wartime writings were saved in the Ringelblum archives, described the procession of Korchak and the children through the ghetto to the deportation point to the death camps. And Joshua Purley writes as follows. Janusz Korchak was marching, his head bent forward, holding the hand of a child, without a hat, a leather belt around his waist, and wearing high boots. A few nurses were followed by 200 children, dressed in clean and meticulously cared for clothes, as they were being carried to the altar. According to eyewitnesses, when the group of orphans finally reached the deportation point, an SS officer recognized Korchak as the author of one of his favorite children's books and offered to help him escape. In another version, the officer was acting officially as the Nazi authorities had in mind some kind of special treatment, quote unquote, for Korchak. Some prominent Jews with international reputations were sent to Theresienstadt. That's in brackets. Whatever the offer, Korchak once again refused. He boarded the trains with the children and was never heard from again. Korchak's evacuation from the ghetto is almost mentioned in Spillman's book, The Pianist. He told the orphans they were going out into the country, so they ought to be cheerful. At last they would be able to exchange the horrible, suffocating city walls for meadows of flowers, streams where they could bathe, woods full of berries and mushrooms. He told them to wear their best clothes, so they came out into the yard 2 by 2, nicely dressed and in a happy mood. The little column was led by an SS man. Sometime after, there were rumors that the train had been diverted and that Korchak and the children had survived. There was, however, no basis to these stories. Most likely, Korchak, along with Wolzhenska and most of the children, were murdered in a gas chamber after arriving in Treblinka. A separate account of Korchak's departure is given in Mary Berg's Warsaw Ghetto Diary. Dr. Janusz Korczak's children's home is empty now. A few days ago, we all stood at the window and watched the Germans surround the house. Rows of children holding each other by their little hands began to walk out the doorway. There were tiny tots of 2 or 3 years among them, while the oldest ones were perhaps 13. Each child carried the little bundle in his hand. So I would ask you first off, please, to write down the name Janusz Korczak. Janusz. Last name is Korczak, Korczak. Janusz Korczak. Okay? And I would ask you to write that down, and I would ask you to do some Google exploration, as well as, if you can, take a look on Amazon about available books about Korczak. Because I think Korczak, when we talk about the definition of what a hero is, as we just did, I think everybody would agree the courage of Janusz Korczak, the self-sacrifice of this man, the warrior nature of Korczak. One needs to be a warrior in order to pursue such a response to the Nazis, and someone of moral excellence. I'm sure you'd all agree on that. So Janusz Korczak is our first hero. You know,
Can I ask
by
you
the
a
way.
question, Avrum?
Yeah. Please, yes,
You
yes.
started off by mentioning young kids climbing over the walls to get food, etc., or to escape, or what have you here. I'm curious whether Janusz Korczak, while he was in control of the orphanage, helped some kids escape. Because there were lots of kids who went under the wall,
Yeah.
as well as over the wall, into the sewers, what have you here. Did he do any of that?
I don't know. But what I will tell you is, Bernie, and we all know this, one of the things we learned about our Jewishness is the inimitable spirits of those people um, who were in Warsaw Ghetto, many of whom were in the camps, and their courage. Uh, we live in the Garden of Eden here in Canada, in Toronto. And so therefore, our responses to situations are muted as compared to what such people like Korczak went through, because we're not called upon to make such decisions. I think there's so much heroism that happened during the war, prior to the war, after the war, amongst our people, that that only so much of it is talked about, and only so much of it is known. I mean, when you take a look at Korczak's personality and the sort of man that he was, recognizing what was going on around him, and he was clearly awake, if you will, conscious. My response to you would be, if that opportunity arose, then a guy like Korchak, then a man like Korchak would definitely respond as such, you know. By the way, I just want to veer off for a second. I'm being a bit ADHD here. Um, I often ask people, you know, we talk about righteous Gentiles, and again, this is in the context of heroism. We've all been at Yad Vashem, and I think one of the amazing things about Yad Vashem is that they have made every effort to recognize the heroism of the non-Jew towards the Jew and towards others. And I think the other thing that we're all surprised at, and if you don't agree with me, then I'm sorry, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, is the numbers of righteous Gentiles, i.e., the limited number. And I often ask people, you're a Jew, right? Do you think in a given situation, chas v'shalom, chas v'chalila, do you think that you would be a righteous Jew? Do you think that if someone pounded on your door and they said they needed rescuing because the Secret Service, the secret police were after them in wherever country, that you would go about saving them at the risk of your own life and at the risk of your children? And of course, the immediate response is, I don't know. But it's an interesting thing to ask because courage seems to be something that when you're faced with it, when you're faced with the struggle of responding in a way that could kill you, that could kill your family, that could kill a community. We all know what heroism very often led to in the camps. If someone did something of a heroic nature, 10 people, 100 people, maybe more people were murdered by the Nazis. So the whole question of courage is a very difficult one. But I ask myself that question all the time. I have a son, Baruch Hashem. I have a beautiful family. I have a beautiful community, you know? I have so much to accomplish. If I were faced with such a challenge of being a righteous Jew, would I respond in such a way? I don't know. I don't know. Any thoughts on that? These
I
are
think
tough
we
questions.
all have the ability to be a hero. My definition of a hero is someone who does something either out of character or not really planned.
Yeah.
So I think we all have the ability to be a hero in a circumstance. It might be a hero to a child, it might be a hero in a bigger context, a burning building or community or something. But I think we all have it in us as one of our, in a lot of cases it's hidden, but we don't exercise it on a regular basis. So it's not something we really think about that we're heroes. But if you step back, you could probably attach the attribute of heroism to almost anybody in some circumstance within their life. Some more where they involve more people or deeper meaning. I'll just tell a quick story since we're talking about Warsaw and the Holocaust. My uncle was 18 years older than my father, and his job in Auschwitz was as a cook, like a sous chef to one of the generals. And he would sneak in um, little pieces of bread in his teeth because they checked them every night when he went back to the barracks that he wasn't carrying food. And he saved my father.
Wow.
And then my father had typhoid when they had to go on the march towards the end. And my uncle basically carried him because they were just shooting everybody that couldn't walk.
Wow.
So my uncle was probably, I mean, it was a father figure to my father. He was 18 years older. But I think everybody has under duress or under those kinds of circumstances, most people will step up to the plate and do something out of character.
Mm-hmm. Brian, I want to ask you something. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but coming from that, you know, having an uncle who was so courageous, and I'm sure that your father was probably challenged by some very difficult situations where he had to respond in such a way. What does that do to you as as a nephew, as a son? How does that change your mindset about yourself or your life, the world in which we live?
Well, I mean, we were raised, and it's part of our DNA in that helping others and looking beyond your own nose to what's going on out there, and that we do live a very privileged, amazing life, and we need to make an effort just to share in some capacity with those around us. And I don't consider it, by definition, a heroism, but maybe to the people that we're helping or the people we're impacting, maybe it is heroism. I've never,
Mm.
if I take out a $20 bill and give it to some homeless guy, it's going to change his day. Maybe,
There, are you still there with us? I think you froze. That
maybe gets 2 bottles instead of one. Maybe, but I don't think of it in terms of heroism. To me, heroism is sort of like people like, if I could just say this, Herzl or
yeah.
Churchill, like those people are heroes to me.
Yeah, I think what I was responding to based on your story was there's a concept in Judaism, which I'm sure you know, the masa avot siman labanim,
Yeah.
that the acts of the father are assigned to the sons. My father was a really, really great rabbi. He was, whichever way you cut it. Like I see the results of what he did 33 years after his death. My mother was a wonderful human being. She was a wonderful Rebbitzin, went out of her way to help other people. That's where I was brought up. And therefore, it's had an impact upon me as a human being. So, really, that's what I was saying. Like, knowing that your uncle carried your father on his shoulders, on his back, that means something about your yichus. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. And it's something like, at least I was brought up where tzedakah is very important.
Yeah.
And I'll just, not to flaunt my family, but I was probably 10 years old with my dad downtown, and there was this native Canadian lying drunk on Yonge Street because his office was near Yonge Street. And he went up to him, and my father had the black hat, the beard, he looked religious. And he woke the guy up and said, "Are you hungry?" And he took him there was a restaurant called, can't remember the name, but not kosher, obviously, downtown on Yonge Street. He sat him down, he called the waitress over, and he paid for him to have a meal. And he apologized that he had to go home and he couldn't sit and eat with them. And
Yeah.
he said to me, which has stayed with me, obviously, till today. He said to me, "You never know who Mashiach's going to be."
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. That's very cool.
So yeah,
Uh,
like,
I think
go
so.
ahead.
Thank you, Brian. I think it's really important. We're veering off a little bit here, but the topic of heroism is very broad. I think it's really important to let your children know the heroism of you, the greatness of you, the things that you have achieved. We're sort of a non-arrogant culture and nation, but I do believe that it's extraordinarily important that our kids understand who we are in terms of the beauty that lies within us. And I'll give you an example. And again, I also don't want to, talk haughtily. It sounds a little haughty, but you'll forgive me. So I was walking across Yonge and Eglinton once with my son, and this homeless fellow came up to us, someone whom I knew. Like I knew a lot of homeless people because that's what Viafta does. And this homeless person came up to me and just with this wonderful spirit started talking about. He looks at my son and he goes, "I want you to know," he says, "that your father saved my life, and he gave me food and he gave me money when I didn't have it." He went on, embellished quite a bit. And we walked away and I thought, yeah, I was a little embarrassed, but on the other hand, it's so important to know who your parents are. And it's so important to know the goodness that they bring to this world and sometimes the heroism. And I would say similarly with your grandchildren. So, my advice is do not be ashamed, do not be quiet about some of the beautiful things that you've accomplished, and let your children and grandchildren know that. The title of the shir is from Moses to Eli Cohen. I certainly want to touch on both of them a little bit. There's others that I want to dive into. But Moshe Rabbeinu, well, let's talk about the heroism of Moshe Rabbeinu. Look, Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Forest Hill. He was born in a very, very beautiful neighborhood, right? Rosedale. And he, through his consciousness, decided that one day he didn't want to live on Post Road. So he decided that he was going to leave the castle, Pharaoh's castle. And when he left, he saw a man beating up a Jew. And with great anger, he went over and he hit that man and he killed him. Other people saw it and they tattled on him, and he took off. And he took off for many years. We didn't hear from him for a long time. But then eventually he came back. He was older. And when he came back, he was approached by God. And God said to him, look, you are going to save the Jewish people. They are enslaved in Egypt, and it's going to be your task to go down there and to rescue them. And Moshe Rabbeinu, being the humble person that he was a shepherd for all intents and purposes by this point, having given up this great wealth that his family had in Rosedale, and ultimately he was convinced by God that you are going to be the one who saves the Jewish people. And he goes down to Egypt. Now, we don't think too much about the fears of Moshe Rabbeinu, but we do know that Egypt was the greatest country at the time, most prosperous country at the time, and essentially was running the world. So for Moshe to go down to Pharaoh, again, who was the mightiest person in the world, and he thought he was a god himself, and to approach him and to say, let my people go, that was a very, very heroic thing. And we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was very humble. We know that because firstly he responded to God, I don't want to do this. I'm not a leader. And quite frankly, my experience is I find that the greatest leaders throughout history and the greatest leaders in our time are the ones who don't want to be leaders, right? Because they're very, very humble people. It's unfortunate for them because sometimes people get pushed into leadership and it makes them very sad. But Moshe Rabbeinu went down and he faced Pharaoh. And there's a very interesting thing that we read in the Torah, right near the very last, second to the last plague. Pharaoh looks at Moshe Rabbeinu and he says with this verve, almost like a mafioso, the Torah's language is very interesting. And Pharaoh looks at Moshe and he goes, look, pal, he goes, this is the last time you're going to see my face. You know, it's like Scarface. You remember the movie Scarface? And Moshe Rabbeinu turns around, and this is mamash in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu looks at Pharaoh, he goes, that's right. This is the last time I'm going to see your face. The inference being is, don't mess with me, right? Because you're the one who's ultimately going to fall. I have God on my side. So you're right. It's the last time you're going to see my face, right? And actually, this is repeated a couple of times in the Torah. But Moshe Rabbeinu grew into this very, very powerful leader and a very, very heroic leader. And I would tell you something, and we need to be conscious of this. Leaders of the Jewish people are frequently fraught with huge problems. We're not an easy people, right? We're a stiff-neck people, right? Mitlonanim v'mitlonanim. One of the things that's talked about extensively in the Torah is how the Jews were complainers. I'm not a complainer. I'm sure none of you are. But many other Jews are complainers, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu said to God at some point, look, kill me. He told him, he says, take me. I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. This is too hard. This is too much of a struggle. And of course, God embraced him. There's a word in the Torah that's used once. I think it says re'ehu, as if God was almost a friend of Moshe Rabbeinu. I think that when we look at leadership over all of the Jewish people, rabbis as an example, rabbis can have very, very challenging jobs. It's as if they have a pagum. It's as if they can't speak articulately. It's as if they're in the desert and they're being put upon by hundreds of thousands of people who are complaining all the time about why can't we go back to Egypt? Weren't there enough graves there? You know, I look at our very own rabbi, Rabbi Shaim, and I once asked Rabbi Shaim, I said, Rabbi Shaim, how many people have you buried? And he thought for a second. He said, probably about 2,000 people. And I said, and do they follow you around? He goes, yeah, they do. And I thought, what a yoke. What a yoke that is to have known so many people, to have buried them, to have eulogized them, to have given comfort to their family. I grew up in a rabbinical home. And when you grow up in a rabbinical home, you are essentially surrounded by rabbinical responsibilities almost 24/7. So if there's a shiva, you go to the shiva. If you have to be a shomer for a body when you're a little feller, you're a shomer, right? My father and my mother, they would have people come in and get married in our house. They would be converted in our house. I think it's appropriate to say when we talk about Jewish heroes, using the word courage, um, using the word not self-serving, but giving of themselves. I think it's appropriate to talk about our leadership and the leadership of Jewish people, of our Jewish, rabbis and rebbitzins. Now, certainly not every rabbi and rebbitzin is extraordinary. That's true. But the job is very, very challenging. And I know just from watching my parents, God bless their soul, that they did many, in my mind, many heroic things, and I feel deeply honored to have been able to have watched that. There was a war in the Balkans not so long ago. It's actually one of the things that encouraged me to launch Via Hafta. I'm going to tell you about this person. Her name is Sally Becker. Sally Becker was Jewish. And she was an artist. She was 33 years old, and she decided to go to Bosnia and try to help out. It's Bosnia, Herzegovina, Sarajevo. She began by delivering medical aid and food to the small Jewish community in Mostar, and through them, she was given permission by the Croat commanders to evacuate wounded Bosnian children and their families from the besieged city. Following this evacuation, she was dubbed the Angel of Mostar, Mostar, the Angel of Mostar. She was 33 years old. Everybody here has heard of Chana Senesh, right? If you haven't heard of Chana Senesh, write that down because Chana Senesh, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, I think Chana Senesh was in her early 20s when she parachuted into Hungary, into Hungary. Yeah. Does that sound right? Sounds right, right? And eventually she was caught, tortured, and killed. But Hannah Senesh was huge, so I really want to focus on female heroism. So she managed to secure permission for the delivery of humanitarian aid to all sides of the conflict and for the evacuation of wounded civilians. This is a huge deal, folks. I know this because I've been involved in rescue operations, and it's very daunting, it's very hard, and it's extraordinarily dangerous. I wasn't there on the ground, but I was on the administrative side. She led a convoy of 50 vehicles and 200 volunteers. A young woman of 33 who was an artist. Can you imagine? She led a convoy of 50 vehicles and 200 volunteers from Britain, carrying many tons of medical aid and food, and evacuated 98 wounded people. Right? 2 months later, this was midwinter. It's freezing in these countries. All aid agencies were grounded due to snow. What did she do? And before I tell you, I have to share with you that people who do these things, and I've known some of them, they are living on the edge. Like they're prepared to give up their lives, and they're extraordinarily creative. We've seen this stuff in movies, where someone needs to rescue a group of people stranded somewhere, so they go and they steal a plane. So what does she do? She borrows a helicopter and she flew into central Bosnia alone to bring out 55 wounded children and their families. When the war spread to Kosovo, she crossed the mountains on foot carrying pediatric medicines to Munich. Junik, a town surrounded by Serb forces. She was asked by the parents of many sick and wounded children to try and evacuate them, but as they reached the Albanian border, they were ambushed. Fortunately, the rest of the group made it safely across, but remained behind to help a woman. She remained behind to help a woman and her 2 young children. This is the selflessness we talked about. She remained behind to help a woman and her 2 children. Sally was captured, interrogated, abused, and imprisoned by Serb paramilitary. Due to the intervention by the British government, she was eventually pardoned and released, whereupon she returned to the border of Kosovo. She traced the children and found almost 100 others also in need of help. The U.S. accepted half the evacuees, but while she was trying to secure places abroad for the remaining 50, she was shot by masked gunmen. Although the president of Albania sent a helicopter evacuator, she refused to abandon the children, like Korchak, remaining there for several weeks until they had been accepted abroad for medical treatment. And then this piece actually ends very beautifully. I'm going to tell you what it is right now. Perhaps the greatest heroes are the ones we seldom hear of. And this is what this fellow says: mothers and fathers who raise families, individuals who channel their skills into making life better for others. I just want to add to this story of this wonderfully heroic Sally Becker that in 1994 I was at the United Jewish Appeal, and it was then through the war in Bosnia and in Rwanda that I was really encouraged to start to begin the beginnings of starting Via Havta. You know, the idea that we said never again, yet there was no Jewish humanitarian response, so that was Via Havta was predicated on. At that time, in 1994, during this war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there was a convoy of buses that drove into Sarajevo one morning and drove to the marketplace in the center part of the city. A bomb had gone off only minutes before, killing a number of people. These buses, there were 12 of them, I believe. These buses, on the front of them, had the logo of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, the JDC, otherwise known as the Joint. And their work was in tandem with the IDF. And their goal was to evacuate 350 people from Sarajevo and to take them ultimately to Israel. And they did. And 2/3 of the people whom they evacuated were not Jewish. And one of them was a Muslim woman. She was 90, late 90s. And she came to Israel. And what they found out was that she had been a righteous Gentile during the war and saved Jewish lives. The interesting thing about this woman was she didn't like Israel. So she went back. Well, the IDF and the Joint Distribution Committee made another rescue, and they rescued her again. And they said, this time you're going to stay put. And she came to Israel and she died in Israel. And why I tell you this is because our, chayelim and chayelot, our soldiers in Israel, together with a miraculous job done by Jewish humanitarian organizations throughout the West and otherwise, are very courageous people. In order to get out of Sarajevo and to make their way to a flight going to Israel, they had to travel on roads. You know those roads, we've all seen them, at least in videos, where there's like this much on the side of the bus, and over that is a cliff. You know what I'm talking about, right? They had to go on those roads, and these are roads, some of which had mines in them, some of which they could have been ambushed. We've all been on an Israeli bus, and the bus drivers, the Nagim, they're crazy, right? The way they drive. But these were probably the same drivers that they used getting out of Sarajevo and going to ultimately Israel. These are people who are so courageous and so brave, and they're called upon to do things that maybe once in their life, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. Another such example that was given when I was reviewing Israeli heroes was Bibi's brother. Uh, uh, what was his first name? I'm sorry. His brother's name was, he was the one who went to Entebbe.
Yonatan.
Yeah, thank you, Yonatan. And, they know that there's a possibility that they're going to be killed. but nevertheless, they go and they do their job in order to save other people. Ellie Cohen, have you all read about Ellie Cohen? You all read about Ellie Cohen? If you haven't read about Ellie Cohen, make it a book to read. Make it some literature to read. Ellie Cohen was a Israeli spy, and he was dropped into Syria in the 60s. And I will cut to the chase. Ultimately, what happened was he became a very important person through his finagling in the government. He was very close with government officials, like high ups. And while he was there, he gathered information, which he shared back with Israel, and which ultimately helped Israel in a very big way in the 1967 war. Well, one of the things that he did was he went to visit some military areas on the Golan, and he saw that there was one which was not really exposed. So the Israelis, when they looked at it, would not really be able to see it clearly. So what he did was he said, "I'm going to give you a gift. I see it's very hot here, so what I'm going to give you is is trees. What are those trees called? Not bamboo. What is it, Barbara?
The eucalyptus trees.
Eucalyptus. And therefore they planted all these trees. And then he sent information back to Israel. He said, when you are ready to attack, make sure you look for these eucalyptus trees, and there you will find a very important military area. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. He was caught, and yeah, there's a great movie on Cohen called The Spy. Okay, thank you. With Sacha Baron Cohen. Yeah, what an interesting. With Sacha Baron Cohen, he was really good at it. So Ellie Cohen is another hero that you can look up. There are so many other people to mention throughout history. Some very, very quiet heroes. Some we know their story very well. Um, and you know something, as Brian says, we all have that inside of us. And I think this person makes a good argument when they say, look, to raise children, to raise Yiddish children, to raise Jewish children, and to do so in a way, where they grow up healthy, thank God, and they grow up with a Jewish consciousness and awareness and a sense of what Tikkun Olam is all about. That's a hard job. It's a really hard job. And sometimes the nights are lonely, and sometimes you're on your own, only with your children. They're little, and it takes a lot of work to get through that. That's a tough job, and some might even call that heroism, and I think I would too. So let us be very thankful about our people and our people's ability to step up when necessary. And I would repeat what I've been saying over the last number of weeks, both here and in my other shirim, that now is the time for all of us to act in a heroic manner. With the advent or the rise of anti-Semitism, it really behooves all of us to play a role as emissaries on behalf of the Jewish people to fight anti-Semitism. So I tell you, please, it's not enough to go to shul. It's not enough to learn Torah. It's not enough to keep Shabbat. We have to be involved in the fight on behalf of our people. And when anti-Semitism exists, as my mother used to say, you can be sure other forms of racism help too. So look for a way where you can be involved in fighting anti-Semitism. And I'm speaking to each and every one of you, and I'm speaking to myself. Okay? Sometimes it's tzedakah. Organizations like Friends of Simon Wiesenthal can always use the cash. BBYO, the Federation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes it's being involved in volunteers, as volunteers with these organizations. But make sure to look and to decide the best way for you to do it. My way of fighting anti-Semitism, I do a lot of work on social media, but my way of fighting anti-Semitism is making friends with non-Jews. I happen to believe that we have many, many friends. Much to the chagrin of some of my family members. I happen to believe we have very, very many friends. And I happen to believe that there are many non-Jews out there who care and are curious and are interested in who the Jewish people are. And I also believe that they would go to bat for us when called upon. I don't believe that the rest of the world was not there for us. A lot of the world wasn't, and there was certainly a lot of room where people could step up. But we have to thank the non-Jew for what they have done for the Jewish people at some very difficult times. So maybe that's your way too. You're out in the world, make friends with the non-Jew, let them know who you are as a Jew, be a good role model as a Jew, but fight anti-Semitism. It's every single person's job here, and sometimes it will require heroism, but make sure that you respond to that. So I want to thank everybody, and I really appreciate it, and I quite enjoyed giving this share. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you again, Avrum. It was just, if anybody had a chance today to see on social media, there was a group of young people who went to the basketball game between the Brooklyn Mets, I think, or Nets, and the Indiana Pacers at Barclays Center. And they were sitting in the first row, and they all had T-shirts that said "Fight Anti-Semitism." So
Yeah.
they all got their time on camera. And that's just one little step. And I think we can all do our piece every single day in the fight against this, and especially on our social media. Thank you. I'm happy to open up the floor for any questions for Avrum tonight. Anybody?
You're saving their questions for next week.
Great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I guess I'll take up the challenge, and not so much a question, but Avram, thank you so much. You always seem to challenge our soul and our hearts and not just our mind. And I really, really appreciate that. I appreciate everybody who has joined us tonight, and thanks for your time. But I also wanted to say that when you spoke about Janusz Korczak, to me, he did one of the most important things as well, and that was to place the trust in the children. For what he did and created those organizations of governmental thought, the children are our future, and those people that have the guts to place their trust within the children, I think, deserve an awful lot.
Yeah.
The other thing that you pointed out, and it hit me very personally because I have been in this situation, is that we all really have to share with our children and our grandchildren, because they really don't know the questions to ask. And there are times when I regret so much that I didn't know what to ask my parents, and there's nobody to ask now, and I can't get those answers. So I thank you for raising those points. Sorry. Really, really important. And thanks so much for being with us tonight.
It was a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
And next week, see you again, same time,
Yes,
same
I look
place.
forward to it. Yeshua Koach. Thank you so much. Thank you.